This is the Buffy and Lamar show.
Great show.
This is the Buffy and Lamar show.
Great show. Thursday.
This is the Buffy and Lamar show.
Great show.
What's happening, everybody?
This is the Buffy and Lamar show.
Yeah, what's happening, y'all? This is the Buffy and Lamar show. I am your host, Lamar Quincy, alongside the one. She is the everything. She is my earth. She is my globe. She is my anti-coronavirus. I love her with everything that I have in my body, every fiber. She is my host, Janita M, a.k.a. Buffy.
What's up?
What's up, Buffy?
I'm good.
How you feel this week?
I'm healthy. I feel good.
You're healthy?
I am.
That's good to know.
That is good to know.
Hopefully everybody else is healthy
Yes.
too, but I'm glad you're healthy.
Yeah, me too. You're healthy too?
I'm amazing.
Okay.
Had a little bit of a thing this week with my blood pressure, but
Got it under control.
yeah, it's under control. That's not something that I'm going to worry about.
Yeah.
I found myself worrying about it a little bit,
Which
but
probably makes it worse, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
probably. But you calmed me down a little bit.
I did. You're welcome.
Thanks. I appreciate you. Today we have a great, amazing show.
Yeah.
We have guests on our show today that we've had on the show before, and they're familiar with the Buffy and Lamar show.
Yes.
And we're so grateful and thankful to have them back on the show again to speak amazing wisdom. And we're having a really, really touchy topic
Good topic
today.
too. Yeah.
So please introduce our guest today.
Well, today, our guests on the show, Mike and Connie Smith. They are speakers, authors, pastors, parents, lovers, and besties. Welcome,
That's
guys.
Welcome to the show, guys.
Hey, how you
Yes,
doing?
it's good. We are also healthy. And
Good.
grateful.
We have the pour out, just in case.
Oh,
so,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Official sponsor
That's right.
Yeah, you plug.
of the month of March.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So thank you guys for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You guys stocked up on toilet paper and hand sanitizer,
We
and
are good to go.
you guys are good.
I think the last thing we were looking for is some chicken and ground beef. We found it last night after,
really?
4 trips to a
4
store?
trips to the store.
Wow.
And we're set.
That's awesome.
Really?
Yeah, so.
There's like no meat anywhere when we went out.
Yeah, we didn't
It
find
was
any
gone.
meat. There was
Yeah.
like a $50 piece of salmon. That was it.
I'm
We
not.
didn't get
I'm
that
not
yet.
kidding. Last night I went through where all the frozen stuff meat is. There was nothing there
Nothing.
except for one box. It was a turducken. Oh my god! A New Orleans turducken. And I was like,
Oh my God.
well, you know what? It's what they say, desperate times. You know.
Right. Yeah,
Somebody's
we don't
gonna
get
pick
to the
that up.
point.
Yeah.
We gotta eat a turducken.
That's right.
You know what? Yesterday was the first time I heard that term.
Really?
Really?
Turducken.
Really?
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was a real thing, really.
Right.
Oh, I see it all the time
I
growing up
know.
or whatever, but I've never had it, but it's
Right.
turkey, duck, and chicken kind of like pressed
That's
together
awesome.
from what I understand, which I...
How does
yeah.
that happen?
I have no... Listen, I don't get into the private lives of edible fowl. I don't... Yeah, whatever they're into, I don't know,
That's their
Wow.
business.
Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting. So today we're talking race. And
Something light, good. Something
Yeah.
light,
yeah, and like I was saying to you guys earlier, the reason why we felt it was important to have this conversation is to kind of be an example to other people on how the conversation about race needs to take place more often, not just when something in the mass media takes place and then
Right,
you want to
right.
have the conversation. This is a conversation that can
Yeah.
be had all the time with your neighbor,
Right.
with people you work with.
When you're not overly emotional and,
Lose the
Sure.
emotion.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that if that happens, we could see some really large steps in progress in kind of mending
Yeah.
relationships
And some
between.
healing, because a lot of people have healing that needs to take place from, hurt where this issue is concerned. And
Right.
good conversation can do that.
Yeah, you have to have understanding.
Yeah.
So I think the ultimate goal, what we want to do, is to just open the door to real conversation, honest conversation, and everything is in love, and just be an example to other people on how they can have this conversation amongst each other. So we had the opportunity to watch a TED Talks that my brother Mike did.
Yeah.
And you did 2 of them, right?
I did, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so the
They invited me back. I didn't think they'd invite me back, but they invited me back.
so the first one that we watched was why I stopped using the N-word.
Okay, yeah.
And what was really interesting about that is your upbringing when you were young, and you were talking about when you left Florida,
Yeah.
and you came into this totally new environment. And I think that that's interesting. Can you explain that to us a little bit?
Yeah, so I've said before that I was often raised in an all-white world. Not literally, but an all-white world. And then dropped out of high school, entered ministry school, left Central Florida, and moved to the south side of Atlanta into an all-black church. And not all black, but I mean out of probably 5,000 people at the time, if there were 5 white people,
Right.
that would be a high estimate. But lived on Old National Highway, worked on Old National Highway, lived with a guy who was my manager at McDonald's, and his family. So total displacement. And it's kind of like one of those things that if a tree fell in the woods, there was nobody there to hear it, would it make a sound?
Right.
And it wasn't until I was out of my echo chamber that I started to realize a lot of the things that had been deposited, because I think a lot of things are not, specifically racism, they're not taught. Some of it is taught overtly, but the biggest part of it is absorbed environmentally.
Right.
And I wasn't aware of what I had absorbed until I got there, and it was culture shock, quite literally. I mean, language, just everything, pacings, rhythms, context of family, style of conversation, style of relationship.
Right.
I can't, and I kind of, but my heart was so anchored in God, I kind of took it in stride. And it was about 2 years in, I was standing on the platform looking out at this all-black congregation, and I was, and the pastor was preaching, and I remember I was clapping or whatever. I think people were coming down to the altar call, and like people were getting saved, and I was clapping my hands looking, but I was on the podium looking out at the congregation, and I looked and I thought, I am the only white person in this entire room. And there was like 2,000 people in the room, and I thought, how did I get from where I was to there? So that was a big journey. It was a big journey, and you don't even know what's in you until you get put in another place.
Let me ask you a question. So as I'm watching it, I had this question.
Okay.
And I feel like that really gave you an opportunity to understand what it was kind of like to be the minority in a situation.
Sure.
And if I'm assuming correctly, that gave you a different viewpoint. At any point in time, did our people make you feel uncomfortable in any way? In like a negative way, though?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I encountered a lot of... it's funny that you say that, because when you're not when you're raised as part of the majority, when you exist as part of the power structure,
Right.
You kind of look at everything in what you believe is a pseudo-objective manner. Like, I'm seeing it for what it is without filters.
Right.
So, if you're raised where race is everything and it defines everything, we go out to a restaurant, have bad service, it's because the server's prejudice. I go out to a restaurant and have bad service, I just got bad service.
Right.
And so those filters weren't there. But the very first time I ever felt this phenomenon was I had a buddy of mine in 7th and 8th grade. He was my best pal. He was Korean. And I went to his Korean church, and I remember walking in, and it was like we were late, and the door shut behind us, and like 400 Koreans turned around and looked at me standing there. And that was the very first time I felt like, oh, I'm not in the herd. Like I'm usually the herd group, and now I'm the outside. Now I'm the guy that's I'm going down to get water. I want no trouble. That kind of a deal.
Right.
So that was a shock. So yeah, I did. I got but I was so oblivious to what was happening because it was not my first assumption about what was going on. So the
Right.
treatment,
Right.
I just thought, oh, you're rude. Or I just thought, oh,
Right.
maybe I've done something to offend you. And it wasn't until my pastor turned me aside and he said, look, he said, he brought me aside. He goes, you're gonna, he said, I'm going out of town for 2 weeks. I want you to preach both Wednesdays and both Fridays that I'm gone. And so I did. He came back. He said, man, I watched the tapes. This is back in VHS days. He goes, it's great. He said, let me tell you something. He said, you're going to run into some trouble. And I said, why? He said, well, you're young. And people think you're too young to be doing what you're doing. He said, secondly, you're white. And he goes, and some people have a problem with
that,
why you're being moved forward.
Right.
And when he said that was the first time I thought, would anybody really do that?
Right.
Would anybody really, because I was white? So there were some things that happened and some things that were said, and even people that came back years on and apologized to me.
Oh, wow.
Hey, I had a problem with, but because I had never been raised around being not in the power structure, I
Right.
lived in an all-white world. I was always
Right.
in the main group. It was when they were explaining it to me, I was like, oh, I never saw that part of it. So I don't
Right.
know if it's So I don't think I felt it as much. I don't think I felt it was a result of my whiteness. It was kind of like in hindsight, I realized, oh,
It
people
was
are like
because I was
that.
white,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I was like, oh, I never. So yeah. So it
Right.
was there, but I don't think I felt it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it
it makes
does.
perfect sense.
Yeah.
So, Connie, what is your background as far as race or how you were raised?
I grew up very similar background as Mike, meaning coming from a majority or basically white world. In school, I went to a Catholic grade school, so if there were a couple hundred kids, we might have
Right.
3 or 4
Right.
black kids in our school. High school had a couple hundred people and a handful.
Same thing.
So it came from a very, I guess, homogenous type background. But I don't think I ever, I had a friend I walked home from school. She lived across the street from me. She was a year older. Her friend in her class was black, and she walked home with us part way.
Right.
But it's very interesting. When she walked home, there was definitely a separation where she went and lived in a part of the city that those several streets was where the black people lived.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when we went on our way. And again, like what Mike said, a lot of it was absorbed, things that I absorbed in my childhood about race. Some of it was overt. Some comments made in, household or among
Right.
friends and things like that was very much overt. But a lot of it, you don't realize until you get outside of it that you
Right.
realize the way
What
of
was going
thinking or
on,
the way
yeah.
you see things. And I think, yes, it's something that I was, aware of, as a young child, as much as a young child may,
Right.
especially in the 80s, may be aware, because a lot is different now than, the
Oh,
80s.
yeah, definitely.
Just even what we see in media and things like that on our televisions when
Right.
we were
Yeah.
growing up. The number of black people on television
Right.
was far less,
Right.
But
Yeah.
even speaking of that, the Jeffersons, that was a comment that I remember hearing about the interracial couple,
Oh, yeah,
on the
on the show,
Jeffersons.
yeah,
And, just so,
Yeah.
it was definitely different. So looking back now, A, as an adult, B, as, things I've been exposed to, you can look back and see, oh, that's what that meant, or, how people viewed things or what a comment may mean. But it's very interesting because we think sometimes that that is behind us. And in the work Mike and I do, even though we're white, we realize it's not. But I think
Right.
a lot of white people think, well, that's behind
Yeah,
us,
yeah.
60s.
I'm over that, yeah.
But my children, our children 12 and 15, because of our life and who, we spend time with and who we interact with,
Right.
we flow in and out of different groups very easily, and our
Right.
kids have always as well.
Right.
Right.
But when they get around a group of kids and then they hear a comment that one of those kids may make, maybe
Yeah.
a racial, and the kid,
Right.
bless his heart, the kid may not even necessarily mean anything. Again,
Right.
maybe something absorbed in their,
their household,
environment.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's definitely a stark comment to my son who
Right.
knows that's
That's
not
not
how we
right,
see
yeah.
and that's not how we feel about people. And so I think we like to think that's decades ago.
Right.
But I hear
But it's still
stuff
going on.
very much
yeah,
so.
definitely.
So that's interesting, Connie, because out of those 200 blacks or 200 white students in your school, I went to a school early on in my childhood where I was one of those 5 black kids.
Wow.
Early on, up until probably about 5th or 6th grade, I went to a predominantly white school. And I think that for me, as an adult now, and I look at that situation, it really helped me to be able to move in and out of different situations, because there were comments. Can I touch your hair?
Sure.
Why do you guys do this and do that? And, the music that I listened to was different. And just that level of uncomfort during that time, I have to say at that time, it was kind of an identity crisis for me, because I really didn't know who I was. Like, who do I really want to be? Because most of my family was in the inner city. But, me, I was out in the suburbs in a predominantly white school. So it definitely was an eye-opener for me as I got older. And I learned, like, how those things really affected me up until this day. Because I told my wife one time, we were talking about race. And I told her, I said, I never feel uncomfortable in a room that's predominantly white room. However, I'm always thinking in the back of my head, for whatever reason, what is their perception of me?
It's big.
Before I even open my mouth or say anything. Because if you meet me, if you get a chance to meet me and know me, you know what type of guy I am. I'm a pretty solid guy, I have to say. Right?
Yeah, you are. Definitely.
You took too long to agree on that one.
I was thinking about something else.
Oh,
but
don't do that anymore.
Mike does that to me
thought she was
all
paying
the
attention to
time.
you.
Yeah, I thought you were paying
the
attention to me.
I'm sorry, were you talking?
So yeah, but that's always in the back of my head. What is this? What are these people? What is their perception of me?
So maybe you guys could help. Like, what do you feel in those situations when there are a majority of white people, and then you have, like, a class with, there's just maybe 5 or 6 black people. Like, when they're in the room with all of the other people, like, do you have any thoughts? Or is there anything running through your mind?
Well, I would say you'd have to separate my Orlando life
Right.
from my Atlanta life.
Right.
So in your Orlando life, what thoughts would have been running through your mind?
There's an othersness to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that is just a result of, how much of that is a result of nature versus nurture. It's conditioning.
Right.
It's interesting you say, I was talking to one of my spiritual sons not too long ago about this very thing. He said he's black. He said he was raised in an entirely white world, which made him very comfortable. He says, in every company I've ever been in, I rise to the top, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
He said, but I've never seen in any of my school teams, whatever, there was nobody that looked like me that was in charge. And he says, so I'm very hesitant to assert myself because I wait for doors to be opened. He said, but my wife was raised around all black people. So all the teachers, principals, law enforcement, politicians were black.
Right.
And she's always like, well, go in there and tell your boss this and this. And he's like, no, I'm a guest over there. But she's like, we're not guests.
Right.
And he talked about the entire, he said, so growing up in my predominantly white environment, he said, gave me certain tools, gifts, navigations, nuances. Right. He said, but growing up not in a place, he said, so when he was really evaluating going to an HBCU, right? He said my brother had gone and said, you don't want to come here. Go somewhere else. And he did.
It wasn't a good fit for him.
He said he did. And he said now he wasn't sure if that was the best because he went to an all-white, predominantly white school and felt like a guest at all times.
Right.
And he says his brother didn't go to nearly as good a school, but has so much confidence and authority and everything else. So this, so if I go, so my understanding today, I'm trying not to filter where I was back then. Where I was back then was, it's different. I don't think I ever, my pastor talks about when he said he was in kindergarten and they came up and rubbed his skin, and I don't think I've ever done anything like that. I do remember hearing his stories about how he was in the bathroom and a kid just turned and peed on him, and I thought, what an awful thing. And then we were in the room, and another guy that was 20 years older said, oh, the same thing happened to me when they integrated school, or 10 years older.
Wow.
So I never encountered anything like that, and you got to be careful saying, this is the white experience or the black experience, because that's a big broom, So me, only me.
Right.
I felt comfort but discomfort. that we were together, but not entirely. There was this one black kid. He was in my high school that kind of hung with us, and he used to mooch off of everybody, like their food or drinks or whatever. And he'd be like, "Hey man," he'd be like, "Hey Smith, give me that, let me have one of your fruit roll-ups." And we called him Bubba, and I was like, "Bubba, take a fruit roll-up," or whatever. So we'd be talking and he would say, to my buddy Matt, "Hey Matt, you got to do this and this and this." But one of his famous phrases was, "Man, let me have a bite." Let me have a bite of that. And he was cool. We partied together. We had fun together, blah, blah, blah. But when he would say, "Let me have a bite," something primal that I couldn't even explain at 12, 14, 15. But it was 100% unlike had Matt or someone else asked for a bite. And I couldn't even explain.
Right,
And it was
you didn't know why.
Yeah, and it was one of the kind of things like, "No, man, you take it," because there's a dividing line between who we are.
Right.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is in those extremes, whereas I was in Atlanta, the only white on the leadership team, the only white on the ministry staff, the only white of the convention team, there's things you can get away with in racial conversation when there's extreme imbalance.
Right.
When it's close together, it's not as much you can get away with.
Right.
But Matt used to call this guy Bubba. He would say, "How you doing, my Negro amigo?" And Bubba would be like, "Man, how you doing?" And when you're the only, you kind of adapt and accommodate and everything else. And I found when I moved to Atlanta and I was the only white guy, there was cracker jokes and that you could never get away with in a 50-50, 60-40 type split.
Right.
Yeah.
So one night we were out in Detroit, and we would always hype up these racial jokes and everything like that at play this, which in hindsight, now that I'm older, I think this was so stupid. But they would be like, they jumped on me in a Shoney's parking lot, and
Wow, Mike at Shoney.
Yeah. And they were jumping on me, and it's like we were all just playing around or whatever, and they jumped on me, and I was walking out to the car, and I was like, I turned around, it was the only white guy. I turned around to like 12 of the other team. I go, "Why are you guys following me? I don't have any money," or whatever. And then they jumped on me and started yelling in the parking lot, "Rodney King, Rodney King, da da da." And it's things that you could never get away with, where there's actual tension, but when the odds are so stacked, it alters all of it. So I think in my mind, at the table in high school, I was in the power structure, and I could navigate from the driver's seat. But move me to Atlanta, I knew where I was, and I adapted and accommodated another way. So to answer your question, what do you think? What do I think now? I don't even know if I notice now. Maybe in an empathetic, maybe in a, not to be a hero. I'm close.
I think it's
honestly
so
closer.
much in the fabric
I'm the
of
wrong
us.
person to
Yeah,
ask.
I was gonna say we're not.
My uncles, my spiritual father, I'm the wrong person to, I'm the wrong white person to ask what he feels like. Oh my gosh, have you seen my family photos? What are you talking about? So,
But that's very similar because if you ask now, I think it's so much of who we are.
Right.
Not in the sense of when people say, "Well, I don't even see color."
Right.
But,
I hate that phrase, by
yeah,
the way.
that, I don't want to minimize it to that, but is just.
Well, we have Uncle David is black, Uncle Andre is black, Uncle Jonas is black, Aunt Cynthia is black, Aunt Teresa is black.
Yeah, I mean,
and my kids don't know any. My daughter's
They
like,
don't know any
"How
difference."
exactly is he our uncle? How exactly?
How did you manage that?
She was like 5 years old, and I said, "Well, but how exactly?
Mike, was Shoney's a thing before you got around black people? Because Shoney's is a thing in our.
Is
it
it
used to, well, it used to be a thing.
when
It
we
used to
didn't
be
have
a
them,
thing.
we had big boys up in
Like-
from up north. You
Yeah.
know,
Oh,
they
yeah,
go by
TJ
different
Boys.
names.
TJ
Yeah,
Boys.
different
Yeah.
names. But when we would travel, we would come down to South Carolina for vacation.
Yeah,
and
you
then
go
there
to
was
Shoney's.
Shoney's, and we
Yeah.
would go to
Oh.
Shoney's.
Yeah, so Shoney's was part,
Oh, okay.
in both worlds.
I
Yeah.
think it was like a Southern thing.
It may
Yeah,
have
it's
Southern,
Southern
Yeah.
because
it is Southern,
when we would come down.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But one of the things when Mike was talking, I thought back to my grade school experience, and never did I, as much as I can recall, think negatively when you talked about touching somebody's skin,
Right.
or I mean how awful it is to pee on someone or be cruel. There was
Right.
never that. But I think one of the biggest things in my younger years, where in my city, which again was very white with a small population of black people in it, is the city pool. That was one of the biggest things that people,
you would notice it.
not even necessarily I would notice, but there was definitely comments, distinctions, people
That's it.
concerned about, you hear, getting in the pool after
Right.
black people. Yeah, and
Wow.
that is what I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying.
One of the things that, as a young kid, when you talk about you trying to find an identity,
Yeah.
that's a lot to put on a young
Yeah,
kid,
it is.
and
Yeah.
so again, from both sides, trying to understand the world and life itself at 8, 9, and 10,
Right.
and then
That's
add
already a
all
lot,
those things
yeah.
on. And but I'm saying, as you were talking, Mike, that I was like, okay, where did I notice or hear the most?
The
And as
most,
a
yeah.
young kid, it was at the
That
city
was it.
pool.
That's it. I think if I this the othersness. Had
Yeah.
I been at a pool and 3, 4, 5 black kids or 2 black families showed up, there would be an instant awareness of othersness.
Right.
And I think that is very much a part of my childhood. But something nobody
Yeah.
ever said, hey, watch this or watch that. It
Right.
was
Yeah.
never pointed out to me. But
And then I think we feel that on the other side as well.
I'm sure.
definitely feel
When
that.
I'm
you
sure.
show up,
Yeah.
Yeah, we
I'm
definitely
sure.
and there's more white people. You
The
feel
record
like
scratches.
other.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right, yeah.
Like, oh, well,
Yeah.
I guess I'm the only one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
we
yeah.
definitely feel that.
Yeah.
I think that goes back to what I was saying. That's what I'm feeling. Like when I said if I'm in a room of
Right.
predominantly white people, I think even if they're not really giving off that feeling, it's kind of like wired into me because I
Right.
felt that feeling before.
To just be aware of it.
To just be aware,
Yeah.
kind of aware of it.
Yeah, not everything has to be spoken to be felt.
Right,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
definitely
Right.
can feel it. So my upbringing was a little bit different. So the schools that I went to were predominantly black. I lived in the city, but I was a minority within my community because I was raised in a 2-parent household.
Ah.
Smack
So-
dab in the hood.
Right, like right in the hood. I didn't realize that I lived in the hood. You couldn't tell me that I grew up in the hood.
I tell you now.
Yeah,
like,
he
you,
tells me
you
all the
definitely
time,
live
but-
in the hood. Like
yeah.
I've been down your street.
He was like a few streets away. My street was like amazing, so I didn't realize that anything was wrong at all. So going to like my high school, for instance, I might have been like one out of 10 kids that had their father in the home, which made it a different experience. So things that other people in my community would experience or talk about, I didn't experience any of that. So I have a totally different upbringing that actually makes me have a little bit more in common with white people that I come in contact with, more than it would with, other people from my community
Yeah.
and their stories or the way they were raised or their experiences, which is kind of weird, actually.
So we used to go to the same park
Wow.
as kids.
Wow.
Totally different experience. And I'm like, that's not the park that I know.
Yeah, mine had
Isn't that amazing?
daisies and butterflies. And
Isn't that
I walked with
amazing?
my mom there, and she was a stay-at-home mom, and it's like he had a totally different experience.
My bike got stolen from that park.
I'm like, what? Where
And
did
I'm
you
like,
live?
this is the same park.
This
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
so some dear friends of ours were having this very conversation.
Wow.
And he was saying, yeah, you know what it's like growing up when the police car has to follow your bus to school because of the people you have on it. And he's like, but that's what it was like growing up black on the north side of Jacksonville. And his wife goes, I grew up black on the north side of Jacksonville.
Right.
We never had a police
Right.
car following us. We never. So there,
Yeah.
that's again, we kind of say
Yeah.
it's dangerous. I was at a PBS race town hall meeting, and they were talking about a fear of police, interactions with police. If there's anything more sad that you can think of is that there are black youth groups, thousands of them, that train their young people how to encounter police in a traffic stop. And so we're talking about, what we're having a conversation is the difference between prejudice, racism and discrimination. So
Right.
there's a lot of layers to this. But I was in there, and this guy stood up and said, my mother told me going out of the house, don't do this, and always watch out for that, and da-da-da. And there were 2 black guys sitting next to me, both one from Atlanta, one from South Carolina. And they said to me, the guy turned to me and said, I never had that conversation ever with my parents.
Wow.
But this guy was on the panel going, you don't know what it's like to grow up black, to have your
Right.
parents to tell you da-da-da. So then this was another interesting thing. Another guy who was raised in a very rough part of Atlanta, he said, I was never warned about dealing with police. He says, as a matter of fact, out of all the stops I've had, arrests I've had, the only negative interaction I ever had with an officer was a black officer. Every other white officer treated me. So it's kind of like you
Yeah.
project out.
You do,
You know what it's like to grow up black. You know what it's like to be black,
Right.
and that's not always.
Yeah.
But this was a wrinkle I never heard. As I was talking about this, he said, "Yeah, but keep in mind the two guys you said whose parents never told them to watch out." He said they were both top athletes in their small town, and the idea that when you're a
Very
top athlete,
interesting.
that reduces your blackness
things
to a
change
degree.
it.
And so again, people say, "I know what it's like to be me," which is really
Right.
all you know.
Yeah,
But you're
that
projecting.
really
So,
is.
oh, you guys must know the exact same things.
Right.
But growing up in Orlando with a 4 or 5 person database,
Yeah.
you don't have enough info to process.
Right.
You have to have a wide database. So I remember on Old National Highway,
Mm-hmm.
my pastor said, she said, would you please take my car and get some gas in it? I have to go to a meeting. So I did. So I drove this very expensive car to the roughest corner of Old National.
I don't even go no national.
And I got out and was pumping gas. And I mean, people were, I was, again, the only white guy for 3 square miles, you know, in the car that I didn't even know where the gas tank was, right?
Right.
So I'm out there trying to figure it out. And people were coming over, talking to me, da-da-da. I was not the least concerned, not the least bother. It didn't matter if it was dreads. It didn't matter what was going on. I was completely at peace because my database, living on the south side of Atlanta, I'd lived there for a decade at the time.
Yeah.
I had a very wide database to be able to filter.
Right.
But when your database is melanin is the definition of danger, and so a lot of the interactions that we have are, or a lot of the things that we are amplified, are people with very small databases
Oh,
that,
yeah.
that lump everybody in, and to pick up on nuance of story that's outside of skin. That's and I think there are a bunch of white people that go,
Yeah.
I was never told. I never used the N word.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
my parents.
Yeah,
so I don't know
everybody's
if there's
different.
a white experience because I think when I tell my story, sometimes people look at me and go, "You actually said those words?" Oh, God. Nobody ever said. And I'm just saying, it's
Yeah.
it's my
It's your experience.
With even saying that though, you know, even though we might have a different upbringing and different experience, I think for us it still is an overall black experience only because we, regardless of how we were raised, where we came from, will still be received the same way just because of the color of our skin. And I think that's what makes it a black experience.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Well, the othersness.
Yeah.
No, you will never be in this country in the power structure. You'll
Right.
never be in the majority.
Right.
And that will never be able
That'll
to be
never
undone.
change. Yeah.
That will never be able to
Right.
be.
Right.
And that is never going to go away. And so what I like you said, conversation is so huge.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have just never been exposed, never
Right.
had a conversation, never broke bread.
Right.
And I tell you what, we can dismiss color, we can dismiss race, we can dismiss homogenous backgrounds, but the patrol car, the judge's bench, the HR office,
Right.
it very quickly snaps back to
Right.
that being the
That's
limit.
right.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, they were hassling President Obama about him not being black enough, and he goes, "Well, I tell you what, I've tried to get a cab in New York." He said, "I'm
black."
as black. It only takes one dot
Right,
in the mixture to be, you know." So,
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I had an experience. I don't know if you guys have ever heard the term owl.
Owl?
Yeah.
OWL.
OWL.
Apparently not, because we're asking.
Should I tell them
Yes,
what the
please
owl is?
explain.
Okay, so an owl in our I don't even know if our whole community knows.
Maybe
that.
not everybody,
Maybe not
but
everybody.
it's, yeah. Once you explain it, then people understand, but yes.
It's an old white lady.
Okay,
I've
got
never
it.
heard that.
Yeah,
So-
explain.
Owls can't be touched, pretty much. Preserved. And it's interesting because I'm at the airport and my son and I were waiting. Flights are getting delayed. Hours. We were at the airport all day. So a woman, she was white, she went up to the counter and she gave them everything. Like she let them have it at the counter, at the gate. And it was interesting because I'm sitting here watching this lady, and it took them at least maybe 30 to 40 minutes before they actually called security. And this lady was really like letting them have it, almost in a threatening way. I come home, I tell my wife about it, and we had a conversation. And I asked my wife, I said, Buffy, how would that have been different had you
If it
been
was me, yeah.
the woman there,
Oh, extremely different.
raising chaos
Yeah.
at the gate agent? What do you guys, in particular you, Connie, what do you think about just that whole perception of black women kind of like being more aggressive.
Right, or
is that
more
what,
threatening.
more
Yeah.
threatening? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Again, I'm probably not the right
Wrong white
person to
lady.
ask because
Yeah.
yes, I'm aware of it. Yes, I know what you're referring to.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not like, what do you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess I don't. I know, as Mike was saying, the database that I pull from
Yeah.
Right.
is so vast
Yeah.
that I know that just because it's a black female coming up,
Right.
Yeah.
that she's pinned as
Right.
that type of behavior.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do understand
Mm-hmm.
that other people, if we're talking about, you know, when you say your community, from my
Right.
community, don't know how to react or may have a pre-notion of
Right.
this is how, you know.
Right.
So you take the same situation and there's a lot more tolerance, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that is throughout, meaning I think black guy to white guy, black female to white female,
Right.
black teenager to white teenager, you know.
Yeah.
And again, it's because of people's lack of interaction
Yeah.
and that what they have absorbed or
Right.
heard or picked up or even, you know, carried out in their own life,
Yeah.
that they viewed things just differently.
Yeah.
You
Do
know,
you-
they see the person as differently before their mouth even opens.
Right.
Yeah.
And
But let me say this, but that's not, to me, that's not a black and white divide. That is what I call the deceptively true nature of stereotype, which is stereotype, we carry our definitions with us, and we observe behavior that fits within that definition.
Right.
It reinforces it.
Right.
And when we see something contrary, we dismiss it as that's
Yeah.
that person
They're
did
not
not
acting-
that person didn't handle that as an owl would. That person
Right.
didn't handle that as an angry. She's not black because of the way she, or her blackness is less because
Right,
she
because
does,
of the way
or
she
her man.
reacted. Right.
That's so if the old white lady comes up and it's like, excuse me, sir, would you da 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 da?
Right.
No, you don't grab that observation and fold it into your database and go, you know what? Maybe all white people aren't.
Right,
And I'm gonna
right.
tell you what.
That's true.
The idea of the angry black woman is not a white sourced stereotype. Listen to any comedian, listen to any preacher. I was told all my life at my church, Mike, you think you're going to get married? I said, I don't know. Well, could you ever marry a sister? I said, I don't really. Would you marry one? I don't know. And you couldn't handle a sister. Man, she would
Right.
chew you up. And
Yeah.
This was not me going,
Yeah.
oh, I
that's a
wouldn't.
good-
This was
Right,
what
yeah, that's true.
what I was fed.
Yeah.
So you get Felicia
Oh yeah,
Rashad.
we get it from every angle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying. Oh,
right,
if
yeah.
you start putting a list of,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the black female. I mean, you know, and then you get into
Yeah.
interracial couples and what the perception is. You show a black guy and a white girl.
Yeah.
Who's the aggressive, controlling person in this versus this? Who's the
Right.
dominant personality? I mean, this
Yeah.
is deep in our
Yeah.
society.
Oh, yeah.
So the idea of, you know, if I see you walking up to the counter in a very stressful situation, there's a track that we've all been played.
Right.
You know, here she goes.
What's
And
gonna happen,
what
yeah.
I try to encourage people to do is, one of the most difficult things you'll ever find is to resist the temptation to insert the racial modifier in a conversation.
Right.
Right.
So you say, I was up there trying to get my pizza, and this lady, black lady, and when you say that,
Yes.
You automatically.
everybody goes, oh, I got context
Right.
now. I got
Right,
context
I
now.
understand.
So I was on the
Yeah.
elevator, and I was on the elevator, and I'm trying to get in the white lady, and people go, oh yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Right,
And
right.
that's
Yeah, you
so we
feed
all
it,
have this
yeah.
book that we feed out of.
Yeah.
yeah, because if a person walks on an elevator and you tell a story,
Right.
and you just said this lady walked down the elevator.
People don't know what you're talking about. But
Right.
if you put that
But-
racial modifier, okay, I got you. Keep going.
But,
Keep going.
but
Keep
the
going.
racial modifier typically is only said about the other race, meaning
Right,
you-
not
I
a
would-
black
I would
guy.
no,
say
a
we-
white
Yeah.
person says this
Oh, there was a
black
white
lady
lady.
walked
Oh,
in.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. That's
So
true.
these are that we carry these
Yeah.
these definitions, these
Yeah.
expectations, these norms. And if I have an unpleasant interaction at a food counter, it's like this lady up here, or this lady cut me off, and they go, "Okay, lady, what exactly? You know, white lady or black lady?" And it's like, "Okay, I got you now because I know what that means."
Right.
And so it goes to parenting. The number of times you just look at the number of parenting memes of, little kid says, "Mommy, I don't want to do that," and they show the little white kid in timeout. Then I actually had a pastor post, black kid says, "I don't want to do that," and it was a black kid in ICU bandaged up. This is the idea. Black parents are out of control. Black
Right.
parents will beat you to death.
Violent.
Da da da. And this is not a white, I believe it is a derivative of racial supremacy. I
Right.
believe it is a derivative of the deceptions of white supremacy. But it is not perpetuated. White people do not go out and say, oh, yeah, black people really beat their children.
Right.
That is something
It's
that
just
is.
fed in, yeah.
And when there's a big crash like Adrian Peterson or whatever, we come out and go, oh, yeah, well, black parenting is different.
Right.
Yeah.
And then so when you see a parent calmly say, Timmy or Tyrone, go sit
Right.
down. So now you're acting white because we are
Right.
issued the definitions of who people are. So there's the old white lady, and then there's the very calm parent who's also the white lady. It just depends on how the devil wants to play those scripts.
That's very true.
And it's very interesting because as you were talking, and I think you put it so well that it's a derivative of things that have been
The lies
part
of racial
our
supremacy.
right,
sure.
yeah.
But you're right. The stereotype of an angry black woman was nothing that I grew up with.
Right.
Nothing, or
My grandfather taught me about black weakness, never about black strength. And the idea that a black man would be strong or a black woman would be strong, I didn't learn till I got to Atlanta.
Wow.
Wow.
So how did he teach you about...
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
My pastor would say this, oh, mess with the paycheck. Let me tell you what you don't ever want to do is mess with a black man's paycheck. The white guy goes in and says, sir, can I? And we always put on the nerdy voice, Eddie Murphy. The white, remember, the black comedian, the black entertainer never portrays the white as angry.
Right.
It's, sir, could I please ask you? So they're portrayed as nice. Let the black guy messing in. He's kicking over this, he's kicking over this.
Right.
Yeah.
This is what we're told, and we brace for life accordingly. Our worldview is we approach life accordingly. No white person ever told me, oh,
Right.
black ladies are out of control.
Right.
I did not pick up that stereotype until I got to Atlanta.
And just
And then I had to realize, so when I hear a ruckus at the mall, or our pastor will go, well, you know how our people are. You
Right.
you can't take us anywhere, can't do
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
And we do the same thing, honestly, because we perceive most black people as uneducated, poor, etc. We do the same thing to country people. They don't get up here and act country.
Yeah.
I ain't never been here before in my life. Because we take who we perceive to be, and we give a caricature rooted in stereotype.
Yeah.
Right.
So when we hear a ruckus at the mall, and we say, what in the world is that? And we turn around and we see the ruckus caused by, oh, there they go again.
Right.
If
Yeah.
it confirms.
If it's confirmed, yeah.
If it's not what we think, we don't go, oh, so maybe my stereotype is wrong. We just
wrong.
go,
No, we
don't do
we just go,
that.
that's an exception.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's the
it.
deceptively true
Yeah.
nature of stereotypes. It's not true. It just
No.
fits what we
Right.
think.
What we
that's
think.
so good. And right before you said all that, you said about what your grandfather taught you.
Oh, yeah.
And mistaught should be because
True.
she said, "Tell me what she was about to
how
ask
did
you a
he-
question."
how did he teach you
Mistaught.
that? Yeah.
Well, no, that was the
How
whole
did he
thing.
misteach you that?
I share this in the TED Talk. He brought me along. There was a guy working on. We had my parents. I was raised kind of lower middle class. My mother started a business, made a lot of money. Her and my dad, and we had this big estate. There was a gardener out back, wrapping up at the end of the day. It was a black guy. My grandfather and grandmother had come over, waiting for my parents to come to take him to dinner. I'd grown up with my grandfather. My birth father drank himself up. I never had a relationship with him. So my grandfather was the only male role model in my life. I had never heard him say, I mean, he was a drinker and a smoker and blah, blah, blah. But he pulled me aside one day. He said, I need to teach you something. I said, okay. He said, you see, I'm 12 or 13. You see that guy out there? I said, yeah, Grandpa. He says, no matter what he drives, what he owns, what he wears, or how much money he has, he'll never be as good as you. Because
Wow.
he'll always be an in, and you'll always be white.
Wow.
And I froze because no one had ever spoken
Said
to me that way.
Yeah.
And it was a molestation of the soul. It was like I had been touched, physically molested, but it was in my soul.
Yeah.
And he was like, now don't tell anybody I told you that. So now an
Now
adult
it's
is
a
asking me to
secret.
keep
Yeah.
an awful secret.
Yeah.
So my mother came home and was in my room, and she goes, as a matter of fact, I've just written the chapter in my new book about this, but my mother says, are you okay? And I was like, I'm fine. She said to the door, she said, what happened? And I said, well, Grandpa told me this and this. I didn't hear what was said, but I could hear it through the door. My mom said, look, you redneck SOB, don't you bring that around my son. But my mother was expressing anger from her childhood because that had gone on all the time in her childhood.
hatred,
My
yeah.
grandmother got a pastor fired because he would not allow her black friend to be baptized at her church.
Wow.
So she was like this major civil rights person,
Right.
Right.
married to my grandfather,
Wow.
who would laugh at the piano playing guy at Showbiz Pizza. The gorilla would play, and my grandfather would get drunk and say, "That ends playing that piano, da 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 da."
Wow.
So these are the two,
Right.
and then all of their children, aunts and uncles, come out of it, and they all took after my grandmother,
Right.
and hated their grandfather.
Wow.
Wow.
Because so they loved him and honored him,
Right.
but they said, "Dad, you got to stop that crap." So that was my first introduction to. I had never experienced anything like that in my life until my grandfather whispered in my ear.
Wow.
Right. Wow. So the other TED Talks, Black Murder is Normal.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really, I don't even know the word to describe that. And the reason why I thought it was interesting is because my background is music. So I come from the music world, some of which what you were talking about in the Black Murder is Normal, where, our culture in our community, the Black community, the only community where it's okay to talk about killing each other.
Write songs about it, and
You write songs about it and you listen to it. And the thing about it is, my wife asked me the other day, she said, "Well, why do you listen?" Because as I'm older now, I don't
Right.
really identify with those things. However, as a young kid, I saw a lot of those things that were being talked about in our communities.
Right.
And that was interesting last night when we were talking about it, is because I believe for me, that's the reason why I would listen to it, is because there's a familiarity there. And within our community, that's the only community where these things exist. So give us a little bit about what you were saying on that.
So yeah, prejudice, discrimination, and racism. Prejudice requires a human heart. Discrimination requires a human hand or some sort of action. But racism requires nothing to be
Right.
perpetuated.
Yeah.
Racism is absorbed into the walls of our thinking, our society. It's in our cultural water. It's in our cultural air. And whereas prejudice and discrimination require action, racism requires inaction to be sustained. So I, living in Jacksonville, which at one time when I was there, when all this happened, it was the murder capital of Florida, did extensive work, civil rights, citizens' rights. I've done my background, and just that was my life. When TED people approached me and said, "Hey, would you like to do a thing?" I thought, yeah. And I had done a lot of trying to expose racism. And people say, "Oh, racism, how much people hate each other." I said, "No, it's deeper than that."
Yeah.
And I realized that the marketplace reveals a lot of the baseline attitudes about racial ideas and stereotypes. And started to look at examples in music where this kind of corporate dissociative disorder, this hypocrisy. So there's a very famous situation with Lil Wayne where he did a song with Future, Karate Chop. He did a feature on that song. And I gotta be careful where I'm at, what I say, because I just talk and the people are like, "You can't say that." So there was a reference to having sex so aggressively that he would leave her vagina looking like Emmett Till.
Wow.
And the blowback was instant and incredible, to the point that Sony and everybody said, they said, "We approve the authorized version. We never approved the remix. This does not represent Sony or not Babyface. LA Reid. It doesn't express it at all. But listen to the original version, and it's about young black men dealing drugs and killing other young black men, which is the one I can
That's
stand
appropriate.
by.
Yeah.
That's the one
That's
I can
okay.
stand by and
Yeah.
say it's just music.
Yeah.
But what Wayne said I can't say.
Right.
Yeah.
So I started to realize that it's not about art. It's about art within the confines of cultural expectation.
Right.
So the story I use in the Black Murder is Normal TED Talk is how Rick Ross, selected as a brand ambassador for Reebok, made a reference to I put a date rape drug in her in her drink. She didn't know it.
Yeah.
And Reebok fired him on the spot. Came out and said, "This does not represent our brand. He doesn't seem to know how serious the issue of date rape is, and how we cannot support a culture that even mocks or trivializes date rape." but the entire Ross catalog is about violence and murder, but and he's not even that. That's not even who he is, and that's the thing. So the idea of, because I heard T.I. say, well, why would anybody be against rap music? I'm not against rap music at all.
Yeah.
But he said, maybe instead of asking the rappers why they sing it, we need to look at the environment that created it. And I said, well, there's deeper than that. I said, because that you would never say to the skinhead or to the slave owner, well, what he's doing is okay. Don't be mad at what he's saying.
Right.
Because he grew up around it, so it's okay. And the idea, and this is what's so sick and demonic about it. When you say that, it implies that young black men are incapable of determining right and wrong. Number two, it reinforces the racial idea that every young black man is a drug dealer, is a killer, because where I come from, everybody is. So now if I police based on what you're saying, but that's not even true.
Right.
I think a lot of people don't know enough black people to know that that's the word I can't even say.
That's huge.
Because Adamsville, Carver Homes, Techwood, Godby Road, all the places that I lived, all the youth pastors, all the youth that I pastored in and out of prison, it's really the fewest of the few that are shooting, robbing, blah, blah, blah. Most kids are going to school, trying to stay out of it. They have parents that are saying, stay away from that, da-da-da.
But that's not the image that people
But when the
want
rapper
out
gets
there.
on and goes, oh, this is my world. No, it's not. Your grandmother was telling you not to. Other mothers were saying, stay away from you. You are the problem. But in the white expectation that hyper-criminalized, hypersexualized black people are the norm, we carve it out. So when Rick Ross did the date rape drug, he was fired. When he talked about the cheapness of black life, he was compensated. And so I never blame the puppet. I try not to blame the puppet. Although I do think at some point the puppet is complicit. Once you're 40 and have a child, a daughter, you got to go, I really can't tear women down like this.
Maybe that's not a good idea.
But for money, and I think in that sense, if I'll devalue black life for financial gain, I think it makes these artists very American. Because that's the essence of what it is. That I can cheapen black life for financial gain. And so they're really as guilty. You're going to get me started on stuff.
Before we, if I may, real quick, the economic part of it, because people are profiting off of the Rick Ross catalog and things like that. But when Reebok stepped in and said, you're not going to do this, is when they got blowback from basically white people. That's and so that was going to affect Reebok's bottom line. But up until then, they carried on.
100,000 white women signed a petition. And Reebok was gone. But it's complete silence. When he's talking about, the idea, the black murder is so normal that it's about 10 times the rate of white murder. And no one bats an eye. No one, it's like, it's not, if I were to get it down to half, if I say instead of being 10 times, let's call it half. People be like, man, we're really doing good. It's still five times more common. So that's how deeply ingrained it is in our culture. And so the TED Talk was about, there's certain things we know you can't get away with anymore. When will we become sensitive to go, you know what, I don't, and half these guys don't even live that life at all. They're, but we know that sells. And many of the artists are told, could you thug this up a little? Could you make this? It's like, well, not really. Maybe, no, but you can. And they get a crafted image.
You can,
like a short skirt for Britney Spears. Like, why don't you tramp this up a little bit? Okay, I'll do that. Because the idea of the hypersexualized, hypercriminalized black male and female, that has market value. And that market value reflects the soul sickness of our. So much so that if you hear a white guy talking about it, you go, why are you trying to rap black? And that's how deep it is, that we've associated criminality with blackness.
I thought it was really interesting to hear you being a white male actually talk to those issues.
I
think that's really big. Because me as a black male listening to it, I questioned, I thought about, I wonder if Mike would be able to deliver that to an all black room. You think
TED Talk?
The TED Talk,
If I may step in, 100%. Because I feel that because first of all, he lives, eat, breathes, stays up at night over these types of things and the wrongs and injustices in the world. But I think he has the credibility.
That's important.
He has the credibility. And of course, people that don't know him, white or black, can dismiss what he has to say. But amongst people he knows, he has credibility. But even with this I don't, the TED Talk, people have been taking the clips and putting it on social media, and,
Right.
the views have been overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah.
White people,
And mostly
people-
from black people.
Yeah, white people
Wow.
don't share that clip. It's been viewed 7 million times. White people don't
And
share
they
it.
don't share it.
It's
Why do
the-
you think that's the case? Why don't white people share it?
Because it's
I don't think they connect.
it's not, the TED Talk is not a rebuke. It's a rebuke to
No,
the power
it's
structure.
not.
It's
Yeah.
a rebuke to the power
Right.
structure.
Yeah.
But when you benefit or, from that, I'm sure you would want to share that
or I'm
information.
dismissed. I mean, I've had threats on my
Yeah.
life. I've had all that stuff. Threats on my family. Blah blah blah. It's
Wow.
kind of like there's a guy with white guilt, trying to appease the white man. Or the other thing I get is it's not white. Blame the Jews. Don't blame white people. And I'm going. It's so. I'm just trying to say. I think again when the Bible says the Bible told I think it's Ezekiel or I think it was Ezekiel. He said, "Don't go deliver my message to the people until you sit where they sit." Because you can bring a word of judgment, but if you've not sat where people sit,
Right.
and
You
I'm
don't
saying,
know.
the black young male funeral industry, from T-shirts to caskets to it's an entire show. It's a
Yeah.
and we're so numb to it. I mean, and unless you've been around that,
Right.
all you see
You
is
wouldn't know.
all you see is well,
Yeah.
yeah, they robbed this, they robbed that. I watch the news. I see there they go again. And I'm just trying to say,
Yeah.
as a Christian, we believe people emerge from the womb created in the likeness and image of God.
Right.
And if you see statistics pooling in a specific,
Right.
in a suspicious manner, you have to ask, okay, is this
Yeah.
a deficiency in this group of people,
Right.
or there's some sort of cultural waters that are shaping this?
Right.
I cannot accept that. Well, some people come out of the womb more
Right.
prone to criminality than others, so
Yeah.
I have to accept somewhere along the way. So you got to go to the head springs.
Right.
My theory is let's go to the head springs, and a lot of people think no, it's them. It's not
Yeah.
us. It's
Yeah.
them.
So why do you think that it's so difficult for us to have conversations like this as white and black people amongst each other? Why is that a difficult thing?
I think part of it starts with just interacting beyond surface level between the two.
Yeah, that's true.
I sit in, a cubicle next to a person of a different race.
Right.
I'm friends with it. Not really.
No, not
Right.
really.
You're not
Yeah.
going out to lunch with
Right.
them,
You're not inviting them to your home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, the comfortableness or
Yeah.
lack of comfortability
Yeah.
is probably where that stems from. But it really needs to happen around kitchen tables or over
Right.
coffee.
Yeah.
Because I think we tried to do seminars or things like that, town hall meetings and everything. But until it kind of gets down to the living room.
smaller-
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
Have a
would-
That's
real
where it needs-
conversation.
Yeah, I've always
Yeah.
believed that. Like, we always try to fix or heal racism and things of that nature and prejudices on a large scale.
On the
Yeah.
macro,
Yeah.
when it really needs to just be my neighbor.
And it can start there
It
and
can
grow.
start there
Yeah.
and then it can grow. Like if we're neighbors and the kids are locked out, hey,
Right.
come over, wait here till your mom and dad get home. You want a snack? And we get to know each other, almost like when
Right.
the guy got. When we were talking about when the guy got killed in his living room by the white female cop,
Right.
and you were like, why don't they know each other?
Why
They're
hasn't she
neighbors.
ever had him over? Or why
That's
doesn't she
big.
know anything
Yeah.
about
That's big.
him? Yeah.
Had she known him,
Yeah.
because they were neighbors, they lived
Right.
in the
Yeah.
same building, that might have possibly spared
That's
his
it.
life.
Yeah, that's right.
I think
That's
so.
right.
The other thing is, I think why the conversations are difficult is the script and the tension arrive at the table before we get there. And now we find ourselves having to defend
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
stuff that's not even us.
Right.
Right.
You
Or
know,
your
it's like-
whole race.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, so what is it, man? With the cops? Like, what and people are really afraid of
Yeah.
it. Well, all I know. Have you watched the news? Do you know that there were? I mean, I've not looked at the statistics in a while. We should just pull up the city of Atlanta.
Yeah.
Look at the number of black murder victims and black murder suspects
Yeah.
in the past. I've lived here 4 years. Yeah, that's going to tell you a story.
Yeah.
And white people generally receive that piece of the story. And then what happens is that story becomes so strong that when I get to know you,
Right.
I
Yeah.
say, well, you're the exception.
Right.
So I don't get to see you as a humanity. And then people say, you're a credit to your race, which is most of your race isn't like that. So it's like, and this used to happen to me at World Changers. Oh, gosh, maybe I shouldn't say World Changers. I guess you can go online and find out. Yeah,
Right.
It's like, just Google me. All right. Sorry. I was trying to keep that, not that, anyway.
Nothing
sorry.
wrong with it, but
Yeah,
just,
right.
So I work for a consulting firm. You never know what I have to say. Anyway, people say, but Mike's not white. Mike, you're not white, or I don't even think of you as white.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing in reverse. And I wasn't sensitive to it because kind of like, okay, but if you thought of me as white, what would that mean?
Right.
Or Mike's more black than he is white. And what we mean is confirming the stereotypes that we've been issued. I see you more in behavior. And so sometimes the kitchen table is one part of it. But sometimes the outside script, the tribal script, is so
Right.
strong.
Yeah.
I don't see you. I go, well, I see you, but thank God
Right.
you're not like them.
Like that,
And
yeah,
man alive,
that's
I mean,
true.
how deep do we have to
We
go?
got to really work at that.
We do.
And
Yeah.
kind of dismissing those thoughts and things that we bring to the table. You have to consciously
Gotta get rid of
make
the
an
emotion.
effort. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot. Okay,
Especially us.
yeah.
Well, but it's so funny you say that
Yeah.
because I taught this at my church, and a woman came up to me furious.
Oh.
Old white lady.
ow.
Oh, okay.
She said when we integrated schools in Jacksonville, my sons, she said a few blacks were bused to the white schools. My two boys were two of the only boys bused to the black school. They were beat up every single day.
Wow.
Wow.
They played football at their school, had a scholarship, got moved to the black school, got removed from football, never got on the team, could never compete, came home crying, bruised every day.
Wow.
She goes, don't you tell me about history. I lived it.
Wow.
And I was like, well, your little micro story is not the whole story, but you start dismissing people's individual experience.
Yeah.
That's
They
right.
they don't want to sit down with the kitchen table to you. And so part of it
That's
is
true.
validate my pain, but also validate my pain
Yeah.
while not making me defend the entire
Race. Yeah. yeah.
Right. That's
very
tough.
true.
That's a lot to ask at a kitchen table.
A lot of layers to have to
yeah.
peel back.
Yeah.
And tribalism. If we were not America, black and white, we'd be in another place. I was at
Yeah.
a Chinese restaurant, and a guy says, "You Chinese?" He said something. He said to the waiter, and the guy goes, "Man, blank, no, I'm not Chinese." And it was like,
Yeah.
and this guy is Andre. He's my friend Andre's black, and he goes, "Man, I'm sorry, did I offend you?" He goes,
Right.
"Man, don't ever call me that."
Wow.
And tell a Puerto Rican guy, "Are you Mexican?"
Wow.
Tell a
Right.
Mexican guy, "Are you Puerto Rican?"
Yeah.
Tribalism
Yeah.
is everywhere.
Yeah.
So we're
It
dealing
is.
with a very human, fallen world reality
Right.
that's being portrayed and put before us in an exaggerated form on television that makes us suspicious of everybody we are. But most of us,
Yeah.
we go to work every day. We pay. How you
Yeah.
doing, man? Oh, go ahead. I open the door for you. I
Right.
open the door.
Yeah.
I was on a Old National gas station. Pulled in, had no money, driving a beater car, could barely afford it. The black guy inside of the counter let me pay pump before I pay. A black guy pulled up in a nice car. He made him come in, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not gonna let that guy." And I was like,
Wow.
"What?" I don't even know if I was experiencing racism.
Right.
I don't even know what's happening
You don't
here.
even know what's
It broke my heart. So
Yeah.
it's complex.
It's a lot.
It's complex. So maybe we can solve it as far as how we relate,
Yeah.
but to throw the whole problems of the world on 4 people, man,
Right.
10 people,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
us. It's ugliness.
Well, we're out of time.
Oh. I don't even know if we were good guests. I
I don't even think we scratched the surface of all of that. But
I
that,
really
you mean we didn't solve 500 years of history here?
No,
not today.
Maybe in next
part
show.
2. Yeah.
Maybe we can wrap it all up in part
Right.
2.
Yeah.
Oh my
Man,
gosh.
thank you guys for coming on the show
Yeah.
again.
Thank you, guys.
and having
Thank
you
you.
so
a
much.
great.
I mean, golly, thank you. This is touchy. Thank you for just letting us be part of. You guys are doing good in the world. Thanks for letting us just play our little cymbal, ting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
And
definitely.
Cowbell.
Yeah,
anything,
cowbell, more cowbell.
Yeah.
anything we can do to promote people sitting down and
Yeah,
talking,
having that
and-
conversation.
Yeah, and so-
And, you know, maybe people can use us
Yeah.
through us and say, "Did you hear what Lamar said? Did you
Right.
hear
Yeah.
what Buffy said?"
Yeah.
You know,
That's
and maybe
right.
you can go to somebody and say, "That's how kind of I feel," and sometimes
Right,
that helps
start
to
the
have that.
conversation.
Yeah.
That's right.
Understanding.
Yeah.
That's
Empathy,
it.
listening.
Empathy, understanding,
Yeah.
speaking out of love. You know, I'm not saying
Yeah.
these things because I want to put you down in any way. I'm just saying these things and asking these questions because I don't understand and I want to know. And in that understanding, we may be able to develop a much better relationship.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that goes for just any relationship. Sure. You know, our marriage relationship,
Right.
we have to,
have to
communicate
communicate,
and
yeah.
understand each other. And once we gain that higher understanding, then we can move forward in our relationship.
Big stuff.
Definitely.
Good
Mike,
stuff.
Connie, thank you guys again.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you
Thank
both.
you.
Thank you for the love.
Social medias. Mike Loves
Yeah,
Connie.
I'm at Mike Loves Connie on Instagram. Michael Tyler Smith on Facebook.
And I am at Connie Loves Mike and Connie M. Smith. So,
Connie Marie Smith. Yeah.
am I Connie Marie?
Yeah.
No, I'm Connie M. You're Michael Tyler.
Yeah.
I'm Connie
Oh,
M.
I'm new. What do I know? We're on there. Just find
You're
us.
on there
You
somewhere.
guys got another book out, right?
Yeah, so we have the Lessons from My Spiritual Father, Stuart and the Magic Dungarees, an awesome parable on the pitfalls of sudden onset wealth. It's a children's and adult book, and then our marriage book, The Proper Way to Peach, is out, and
We
it's
are
doing good.
Steady working on
Yeah, steady
others.
working. We got the version of the trollop. The version of the trollop is
version of
supposed
the
to come
trollop.
out. Yep, that's supposed to come out later this year, and Far Falling Apples.
Nice.
Yeah, good stuff.
Awesome.
Awesome. So this is the Buffy and Lamar Show. You can catch us on Spotify, Apple, TuneIn, iHeart, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to our page. Follow us on Instagram at Buffy and Lamar. We are on Facebook, The Buffy and Lamar Show. Please tune in to us again next week.
And visit the website.
Visit
You
the
always forget
website.
It's a little new.
Well, you know, social media is the thing. The
Yeah, it
website's kind of that's
BuffyandLamar.com.
1990-ish.
Okay, gosh.
The website is a little 90s-ish.
Okay.
Thank you guys for listening.
Yes.
Hopefully you received something from this show today. Have those conversations.
Yes,
Talk to your
please.
neighbor that you may have never talked to who is maybe of a different race. Doesn't have to be black or white. It could be Asian. It
right.
could be Mexican,
Have the
whatever.
conversation.
Understand each other, grow together, and hopefully we can develop better relationships amongst each
right.
other. All right? This is the Buffy and Lamar Show. Thank you guys for tuning in. Peace.